I'm in Fishhook, yeah, which is not strange, but that's where I grew up.
Wow.
And we lived out of Cape Town, in fact, for decades.
Okay.
And when we came back about 12 years ago, my wife was quite keen to come back to Fishhook. So that's where we are.
Cool.
I started in Standard 3, which I think was 1964. It was quite a change for me because Sub A, Sub B, Standard 1, Standard 2 were at a local convent here in Fishhook, which I could kind of walk to. And SACS was a whole new world because it meant catching the train from Fishhook up to Newlands, obviously, and much bigger. The convent that I was at, the little Catholic convent, was small. It obviously had 4 classes. And so SACS was a very, very new experience, very new. But to be honest, while it was new, it was fun. And my overriding recollection of junior school, I suppose, was it was enjoyable. It was different. Lots of new people. Sport that we didn't obviously play in Standard 1 and 2. I kind of remember Billy Hunter. He was the headmaster at the time, and then later on it was McEwen. So yeah, it was something very different for me to move out of a little world of Fishhook to something quite different. The train system was quite good. It was efficient. It ran nicely. Catching the train was part of the journey. It was part of the thing that we had to do. Certainly in high school, one of the trends was always to sit there with a case on our lap, do all our homework, and certainly in summer, by the time you get to Fishhook, the homework's done and you could hit the beach. So the train journey was never strange, particularly. You meet people, you chat. It was just part of life. I had no issues with the train journey really at all. Well, there were quite a number of people, not just from SACS. So every morning when we caught the train throughout my school career, junior and senior school, there were a bunch of people that were friends in Fishhook that were going to SACS, Rondebosch, Bishops. There might have been 1 or 2 people that went wrong and went to Wynberg, but there were a bunch of guys. So in the early years, John Sleep and I, we've known each other for a long time. Guy Biddlecombe in senior school. I don't think he was with us in junior. And then there were a bunch of guys that we were very, very friendly with from other Rondebosch or Bishops. So it was like a bit of a gang. And we met up at the station and had whatever fun we could on the train getting up to SACS. In later years, and I know we'll get onto the high school, that was always a bit of a pleasure meeting up with some of the girls from Sanssouci. And so there was that to it. And running from the station if the train was a little bit late to get to assembly and get to school on time. I remember that. So, I don't have any negative recollection of struggling to fit in. We just got on with it. And I don't know, Andrew, I think the culture in those days was you don't whinge and whine and so on. If that's what is going to be, that's what it is. And you get on with it and you blend in. And everyone that I came across, certainly, that we were conscious of, was there, blended in. We were school pals. I mean, you don't like everyone and dislike people, but you find who you want to associate with and you get on with. When all of this was coming up, I went through all my old pictures. I had to scratch them out of the garage. So I got all my old photographs out, including my ones from junior school. And if I hadn't looked at the photographs, I wouldn't automatically have remembered who my teachers in junior school were. But I actually remember Mr. Warren. He was my teacher in, I think it might have been 4. And Laidlaw, I remember specifically from Standard 5. But other than that, nothing that jumped out in particular, no.
Cool.
I just have a recollection of a fun junior school. Played cricket, played tennis, cricket and rugby rather, not tennis. And it was good. So senior school was a little bit different for me, I think, compared to some people. The reason is I might have gone into senior school in 68, but I failed Afrikaans in standard 7. And what I recall quite distinctly and in a slightly negative way is my parents were given my results for standard 7 the first time round, which said I passed. Then the school inspectors, in doing a audit of the results, found that I, in fact, had not passed Afrikaans. So I had to repeat standard 7. Now, that is after I'd been told already that I'd passed. That was a shock to the system. And I kind of remember that in quite a, not traumatic, I think that's over the top, but it wasn't fun. So all my guys that I'd been with from junior school to standard 7 had gone through, and then it was just a matter of making a whole bunch of new friends, which was great. And then continuing. I started school, I did 7 twice.
At high school?
So I went with it. I did 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, then did 7 again. So that was just the way it was. I mean, I have absolutely no idea. I suppose Afrikaans was so foreign that, and I don't know why I failed, but I mean, I failed Afrikaans in standard 7. No, my parents were South African, but from a kind of cultural point of view, I had no exposure to Afrikaans at all, other than at school. It's the only exposure I had actually to Afrikaans. So I repeated 7 and then continued. I think the one point is I might have started school a year earlier than many people. So I was probably 9 to 12 months younger than a lot of people. But after I'd failed, from an academic point of view, my results were considerably better. And I haven't looked at my old reports. By the time I was in 9 and 10, I was in the top 5, 6 in the class. So I think having failed was probably good academically for me. I think I might have been a year too young. Yeah, I started when I was, I think, just 6. I mean, that's, to be honest, that is the only kind of shock, I suppose, to the system, when I'd been told I'd passed and then, in fact, had to repeat the year and see all the people that I'd come right through. Okay, so what happened then is my parents got a letter from Robin Whiteford, and I still have a copy of that letter, in fact, which says it's a mistake which we feel can't go uncorrected, but the school inspectors have done an audit, and in fact, your son has not passed standard 7 and will need to repeat it. I can't remember the specifics, but the letter came after the report, and it's not something I don't think would go down too well these days. But you know, that was it. That's the way it was, and I did standard 7 again. As I say, the academic benefit, I think, was there. That it was a difficult experience, but you know, one moves on, and I think in every way moved on quickly from it, and thoroughly enjoyed my senior school. With that one little blip, the rest was good. I actually played rugby for a couple of years, but I was in the scrum and also played a little bit on the wing, but I broke my arm about 3 times, and eventually our local doctor here said hockey possibly is a better solution. So I changed to hockey. And one of the photographs I've got, I must say, you and I played in the under 15A together. You and I were in the senior band together. And I must say, in quite a few of the photographs, I was surprised. If you'd asked me before I looked at the pictures, I'd never have said, yeah. In fact, I couldn't really remember who or what team I was in even. But under 15A, you and I were there. And I think John Sleep might have been there, and the Bowens and a few other people.
What was your experience of being in the band, the senior band and that?
Loved it. Absolutely loved it. for whatever reason, skipped the junior band and went straight into the senior band. So in 71, I was a side drummer. Simon Sloan, Mike Lear, all of those guys. Side drummer. And what stands out for me were on Rag, I think it might have been 71, we marched down Adley Street in the days when the SACS band was still leading the Rag procession. I remember before the celebrations, I think for the 10-year Republic, we played in Goodwood with a mass band display. I also recall playing on Newlands Rugby Ground prior to some big rugby match. I can remember that quite clearly. It's the only time I've ever been onto a Newlands Rugby Ground.
Me too.
Not into it, but onto the field.
Yeah.
So I remember the band. I remember all the practice. I remember John Ince very, very well. So it was all in all good. Yeah, I loved the band. I remember Ralph Kelly quite well. And the reason I remember Ralph Kelly is he was quite cultural. And when he discovered that I had, in fact, learned the violin and been trained on the violin and played in the National Youth Orchestra for a couple of years, he wanted me to bring my violin in, and we started a bit of an orchestra. And I remember actually playing in a small concert up at Rosedale the one year.
Michaelis.
I can't remember at all who else was in the orchestra with me, but Ralph Kelly drove that. John Bardenhorst, I remember very well. He was my teacher in the matric, E2, and I bumped into John a couple of times over the years, post school. He certainly stood out for me. I remember.
What way?
Do you remember Bobby van der Feest?
I do.
Now, the one thing that I remember, and this is definitely, I don't think ever going to go onto the video, but Michael Storr once gave a lot of lip to Bobby van der Feest in class. And Bobby van der Feest just walked up to him and belted him a hell of a shot and almost knocked him off his stool or out of his bench. That's something that I remember. But as I said, that's not for going anywhere. So, you know, I remember Mr. Waller.
Oh, yeah.
I think he was our geography teacher. I do remember, I think in Standard 6, a chap called Nancy, who, can't remember his surname, Nancy, who was our science teacher. I don't know if you're, but I think John Bardenhorst, John Ince are probably the two that stand out the most for me. John Ince, certainly from a band point of view, I always found him to be understanding, caring. It probably sounds a little bit weak, but he was always such a good chap, so objective about everything. So I really got on with him. John Bardenhorst, I think I just gelled with partly because he was taking the classes that I was particularly interested in, and he was a good guy. Yeah, I played in a National Youth Orchestra for a couple of years when I was 12, 13, 14, and I really can't remember how that came out.
What was that like?
Especially seeing us now doing drums in the band and so on. But Ralph Kelly heard about it and said, no, get your violin in here and let's see if we can get a little orchestra going, which we did. And we had some concert up in Rosedale, as I say. And at the same time, I was also fiddling around a bit with the guitar, which I still play a bit. So I've always enjoyed music.
Mm-hmm.
Although the drumming and the guitar wasn't working too well for my violin teacher, but there we go. I enjoyed my matric here. We had quite a big class. In fact, when I was having a look at the photograph, we had a fairly big class. When I was looking through a couple of the yearbooks, I did see that E3 was a particularly small class. And Orford was your teacher, was he?
Was.
I enjoyed all my years at SACS. I enjoyed the sport I played. I enjoyed the band. I enjoyed the academic side. I worked fairly hard after my little stumble in Standard 7. And the matric year was a good year. Yeah. Okay. So I joined Barclays DCO, worked there for 6 months, went to the army. in the July or June 74 call up. And one of the first people I saw, in fact, in the army, who was a corporal of mine, was Robin Shuttleworth. I don't know if you remember him.
Of course.
Yeah, I see he's disappeared off the scene. He hasn't been heard of, I don't think, for a while. I'm not sure. But anyway, I saw Shuttleworth there in the army. But I finished, just in brief, I finished the army. Then obviously I did about 10 years of camps up until 88. But, these 3-month call-ups when Angola was busy on the go and so on. So I did about 10 years, but not every year. When I was busy with exams and so on, then I made absolutely sure that I was getting out of it. But towards the end, the military said, come and finish it off, which I had to do. I was trained at 1 signals in Heidelberg, the Transvaal, and then went on to specialize in 2 signals, and was then deployed to the border straight away, where I spent most of all my other camps and so on, intercepting foreign nets, all the foreign signals that were going on around Zambia, Angola, Mozambique, places like that. So, and in the army, I bumped into a couple of times, I think, Tony Nocton-Smith. He was someone that I bumped into. I have a recollection that we might have also bumped into, I might have bumped into Peter Erasmus, but I'm not entirely sure if I'm right in that. After the army, after my 1 year, it was back to the bank for a couple of years.
What did you do?
My banker's exams. Yeah, I did all my banker's exams and then went to UCT in 82. So I was a bit of a late bloomer as far as varsity was concerned. Finished in 84, 85, up to Johannesburg with my wife, who we were married in 78. And we had 1 child already. So we went up to Johannesburg on a transfer and spent many years in Johannesburg. I was in quite a specialized area of structured finance. Went across to London, worked in the city for a few years with a US investment bank. Came back to Johannesburg towards the end of the 90s, right at the end of the 90s, in fact. Went to RMB, so I was in investment banking, and retired from there quite some years back. Came back to Cape Town in 2009, and having spent so long in investment banking and structured finance, it was time absolutely to start slowing down quite a lot. So I worked still in Cape Town for a couple of years, stopped that, consulted for a few years, and then I guess fully retired 6, 7, 8 years ago. So in brief, that's kind of the life. I now have, obviously, my wife. We've been married for 45 years and 2 daughters and 2 grandchildren. So we are spending a huge amount of time with the grandchildren, in amongst all my other interests and hobbies. So it keeps us busy. We, for many years, have enjoyed traveling. So we travel, and some years back, we did quite a series of more adventurous travels up into the Arctic, so I could photograph the Northern Lights. I'm a keen photographer. Down to the Patagonian ice fields to have a look at some of the glaciers down there, Machu Picchu. So those were slightly out of off the beaten track destinations, I guess you could say. Obviously, when we lived in the UK, in London, we got an opportunity to travel to Europe, which we did continuously. You could drive down to Dover, get on the Channel Tunnel, and then drive around Europe. So we did that quite frequently. And from London to New York is also a fairly short hop. So we managed to get across to the States a couple of times. So we enjoy our traveling. COVID has thrown a pretty big spoke in that wheel, but we're looking forward to getting out again.
What is it like living in the UK?
I absolutely thrived. My both daughters were at school over there,
Whereabouts were you?
and we loved it. And we stayed in Kingston upon Thames. So it's just southwest London, nice area. I commuted every day into the city, and I absolutely loved it. Loved it. I felt completely at home from a work point of view. My girls enjoyed their school. My wife enjoyed it, and we got to travel around the UK and Scotland and Wales and so on, pretty much all the time. So we'd often go away, even if it's just for a weekend. So we saw a lot of the place, more of the place than many Brits, in fact.
So what made
You
come
see a
back
lot
to
of
South
Brits
Africa?
that
What made you go back to South Africa?
I needed to come back from a work point of view. So while in many respects we were a little bit unhappy to come back, I'd like to have stayed on for a good few years more. We needed to get back. And as I said, I was straight back into the merchant banking scene with the RMB. And it's long hours, lots of stress. By the time you get to your early 50s, you get not burnt out, but one has to just reassess what's going on. What I was doing was involved large sums of money. So we were doing a lot of projects that were multi-billion rand, and I'm going back now 20, 25 years. So they were really big projects across all the industries, steel, petrochemical, paper, whatever. And the work involved in terms of not just the marketing, but the financing, the financial mathematics, which I was particularly involved with, the legal, making sure that all the contracts and those contracts were long and involved, captured correctly all the commercial aspects of every transaction. And the hours were long. You could start at 7 and in the morning and finish at 9, 10 at night. The complexity and the volume of work. And there were a couple of transactions that were cross-border transactions. So with time zone differences, one occasionally would need to do all-nighters where you consulting with people in the States or consulting with people in Australia, and the actual programming of all the financing, the creation of financial models, which was one of my specialities, was time consuming, complex. It all had it. And we worked in small teams. So while I would create a financial model, there was always someone to back me up and someone that would check it, because when you're dealing with R1 billion, and that's 20 years ago, you can't be out by a decimal fraction. It's got to be absolutely right or it's not acceptable. And these were big deals. But what I will say is the one thing you can't take away, while it is absolutely a young man's game from a energy point of view, is the experience over the years can never be captured by the youth. I mean, that experience is what drives the creativity very often. And it's just strange in the world we live in that experience is something which seems not to be as valued by the corporates these days as it might have been many years ago. The swing to youth is great, but a lot of that institutional memory and what have you disappears when the old guys go. That's why when I came down here, I spent, as I say, after I'd done a few years full-time down here, I went back to pick up a couple of consulting roles where I was specifically asked to apply my mind, because it's difficult to get that experience and to get the technical know-how, which fitted very nicely with what I had done with the RMB. So I consulted for a bit, and you can see that the experience is just not out there. More now than before, in fact, I'm sorry to say. So, yeah, people do need to get back, and if they can. What I will say is, when it got down to the point where I could say enough's enough. I had quite a number of interests, as I say, like photography and so on, that kept me very busy and still does today. And fishing in between. So grandchildren keep me and my wife, obviously, extremely busy. So we are a big part of their lives, which is important for us and I think for them. So, even now on full retirement, and have been for years, there very often aren't enough hours in the day to do what I need to do. So, and that's good. I enjoy that. My grandson is 8 and my granddaughter's 3. And the 8-year-old is different. I take him down to Simonstown on a nice day and we do a bit of fishing or we do a bit of a hike. I'm here in Fisher, so I can just pretty much go out of my front door and we right on Table Mountain National Park up towards Elsie's Peak. So he loves going up on the mountain and we hike up there. But my granddaughter, everything is at 100 miles an hour. There's no moderation. It's either asleep or 100 miles an hour. So that keeps us very much on our toes. But we love it. We absolutely love it. What SACS gave me is discipline, and obviously there's a tradition and a culture. But I think the fact of the matter is we grew up in a time of discipline. So you knew what the rules were. I mean, obviously everyone breaks them here and there, but you know what the rules were. Things were what they were, and it was a matter of getting on and doing the stuff. And you had to do it right if you wanted to pass. There were no free passes in the way of just getting through things and getting certificates that said, well, you know this and you know that. It didn't work like that. From there, I picked up, as I say, some experience in the banking, but then at UCT, I also worked my bum off. I worked very, very hard. My focus obviously was on things like accounting and tax and finance. So I was very numbers oriented. And when you get to merchant banking, leadership's important, but by and large, the way the merchant banks operate is they have traditionally quite flat structures. So it's not hierarchical. You'll have a guy that is leading a division, but within that, it's more an owner-manager culture where it's not a matter of saying to X, Y, and Z, okay, look, here's a job for you. You have to be able to deliver that yourself. You need to know what to do, how to do it. You work in teams, obviously, because different people in the team will have different skills, whether it's credit or legal or whatever it is. But innovation is a big part of that. So to get the deals and the big deals, it's not just a matter of putting out cookie cutter solutions in that environment at all. There you need to come up with, at times, brand new products, which you can then roll out where there's an application later on to other people. But there's constant innovation in terms of how the financing works from every aspect, legal, accounting, compliance. It doesn't matter credit, it doesn't matter what it is. There is constant innovation going on from the financing point of view. And one has to be, as I said, together with your teammates on top of what is going on. It's not a matter of, as I say, letting other people do it for you. You have to be able to do it yourself. SACS has had, and hopefully still does, had a culture of success and had a culture of, whether it was academic on the one side or sport on the other, it had a culture of achievement. And that obviously gets absorbed. And, if you aren't going to gel with it, you're not going to make it even in SACS. I suppose there are people that can go through SACS and perhaps not achieve what they want to. But when you look, and what struck me, when you look at all the emails that have been going backwards and forwards just for this reunion, the number of people that have achieved in whatever field, it doesn't matter what it is. And it's not because they're doctors or professors or whatever, but generally speaking, they're achievers in whatever field they've chosen. And I think that culture was there and one could sense it. Look, I mean, we were privileged with that education. There's just no doubt about it. I mean, we lived at a time when you're young, you might not always appreciate it. It's the environment that we lived in that made it probably difficult to appreciate. Obviously, on reflection, one can see that that it was a superb education that we were lucky to have, privileged to have, but you don't necessarily, as I say, appreciate it at the time at all. Not the privilege of it. When you look at the grounds, those aerial photographs that were always in the centerfold of the yearbook, I mean, it's just absolutely outstanding. It really is today still such a marvelous institution. And just by the way, the headmaster, Brendan Grant, he's a keen fisherman, and we often chat down at Roykrantz where we fish, because he and I fish together there from time to time. When he's got a chance and when I'm down there, we meet up, and it's always good to catch up. I think one of the things that SACS, probably even a bit subliminally, got through to me, and I'm sure to most people, is that when you finished with your education, even during your education, there are no handouts and no freebies. You have to kind of work for what you want. And I think that is the one thing that, and I experienced it, like I say, in Standard 7. You bugger around and you perhaps don't work as hard as you should, and then bang, you're repeating the year. Now, that certainly was, I think, a wake-up call, as I say, for me, to refocus. And if I wanted to get to matric, you need to work. And there's no way around it. No one's going to say, but okay, look, here's a certificate for you. It doesn't happen. And I think that is ingrained into people that came through SACS. As privileged as it was, there was still, I think, that culture of having to work for what you want.
Spot on.
I never, ever had the impression that it's privileged education and things will fall into place. You know, you get a damn good education there, good education. And when you go out into life, for most people, with very few exceptions, you have to work for what you want. Clearly, not for everyone, but for most normal people, you have to work, and you got to work damn hard to get where you are.